To me, what we work on here at Harvard, and in my lab more personally, is we're trying to make people healthier for longer. That's what we do here at Harvard. So the world that we're about to enter, I believe, and the world that almost certainly our children will live in, is going to be very different from the one we know now. As different as the world is today from the time when, before we had antibiotics to cure disease. We know this intuitively, that there are very big differences in the way we age. And not just how we look, actually. We now know that our internal organs age at different rates as well from other people. And what we're finding from studies of simple organisms is that there are genes within these organisms and within ourselves that control how fast we age. And more importantly, I think, how susceptible we are to diseases of aging, such as cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's, to name just a few of the diseases that aging causes. And so what we're hoping to do by understanding how these genes work and how they can slow down aging is really to develop medicines that would prevent and treat these major diseases of society. Now, there are some families that live a long time. These are centenarian families. To give you an example from New York, this man at the time was 100 years old. He's still going well. Here's his son at 70. Now, I don't know about you, but I think he looks really good for 70. And what some studies are showing is that even how you look can predict how old you are, even biologically, internally, and how long you might live. And these families, we're learning, have certain variants of what we call longevity genes. And it's an extremely exciting time, because if we can understand which genes we can target safely with drugs and manipulate them, we might all be able to live as long and as healthy as these people do. It's about not worrying about getting cancer in your 50s and 60s, having a heart attack at 65, or getting Alzheimer's at 70. We can push that to much later and hopefully extend the health span of our lives. Well, why not just study specific diseases? And I think that's great. We do that, and we've done that for the last 200 years. I think that studying aging is a great way to have a big bang for the buck. And what I mean by that is that there might be a pill that we could develop, and we're certainly working towards that, where you could take it, let's say, from when you're 30, and you might prevent diabetes, but at the same time, as a side effect, you might prevent cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's at the same time. And that seemed to be very possible from the studies that we've done in animals and monkeys, and even some early clinical trials, as I'll show you. But what's happening is that people are living longer, but their brain is not staying youthful. So we're ending up with a society of people that are living long, but their quality of life is very low, and their families are burdened with the care, typically. Oh, this is speaking of longevity, my family looks nothing like these centenarians. They abuse their bodies. This is a photo of my auntie eating a hamburger, typically, and every photo she's eating. They smoke. But the point here is that these drugs should also help people who don't have these longevity genes. And in fact, some of the best effects we see in animals when we treat them with these potential drugs is that they work very effectively in mice that have Alzheimer's or diabetes or obesity. And so I think we can help everybody here. I'm not sure how long I'm going to live, but things don't look that great from my family side. So that's another motivation to get up early in the morning and work hard. So this is some really interesting statistics. This is fairly recent data showing that, at least in the UK, even though people are living longer, they're not living life in a quality way. Quality of life is not going up. So what I would like to do is to make this curve, even though we're getting longer, I'd like to go the other way. And it's been predicted that if we could slow multiple diseases, not just one at a time, we could have longer life but also healthier life as well. And that would be great for families as well as the economy, of course. So the scientific part of this talk begins here. This is a yeast cell in the middle. This old yellow yeast cell is about a week old, and she's about to die. This is the yeast that you grow beer, that you make beer with. You put it in bread. And what we started doing back in the 1990s was asking some fundamental questions. Why don't yeast cells live forever? And can we do something about it? And the culmination of that research, I was over at MIT, was that we found a set of genes. We call these Sirtuins. And we found that if you put extra copies of those genes into these yeast cells, they lived 30% longer. And we found out that what these genes were doing was mimicking low-calorie diets. It gets really interesting when I tell you that most life forms on the planet have Sirtuin genes, including ourselves. We have 7 of them. And I've spent the last 13 or so years here at Harvard trying to understand what these Sirtuin genes from yeast are doing in our bodies. And what we're finding, and now there's 800 papers in the field per year to back this up, is that these sirtuins are protecting our bodies from aging as well as diseases of aging. When you put extra copies into simple organisms besides yeast, things like little nematode worms, fruit flies, and even mice, in a study that just came out last month, they live longer because they're healthier. Now, this is the famous molecule resveratrol. A few years ago, we published that resveratrol would activate one of the main sirtuin pathways, the gene's called Sirtuin. And this resveratrol, I'd never heard of resveratrol when we found it in the Harvard screening facility, but it was the best molecule we had at the time. And I Googled resveratrol, and what I came back with, the top hit was molecule from red wine that is thought to improve health. I don't think necessarily that resveratrol from red wine is going to be a drug. In fact, I saw a number of you drinking red wine earlier. You'd need to drink a few hundred glasses a day to get the amounts that we think are necessary, which I don't recommend. Although I was saying to George Church earlier, who's a speaker, that you might need to drink hundreds of glasses of wine, and he said, wow, the news just keeps getting better and better. So we call these molecules stacks, as you can see up there. And what resveratrol did that was important was it showed us that it's possible to make a molecule or find a molecule that could slow down diseases of aging across the board. So on the right is the mouse that got resveratrol. It was on a high-fat diet, so it had diabetes, obesity. And at first we thought, well, this resveratrol stuff isn't working. What a shame. It was a nice idea. It worked in yeast, worked in flies, but it's obviously not working in the mice. But what we discovered in collaboration with the National Institute of Health was that this mouse, when you open it up, is youthful inside. Its organs were pristine. There wasn't this buildup of fat in the heart or the arteries. It's had no diabetes whatsoever. And the gene expression, when we looked at what genes were turned on and off, it looked much like the thin mouse on the left than it did its counterpart in the middle, which didn't have resveratrol but was fat. So we found a molecule that was able to impart the health benefits of a diet, even though the mouse was fat. And that was a really interesting finding. Now, this molecule here on the left is the culmination of many years of work, thousands of hours of human activity. There have been 4,000 molecules made since resveratrol in the lab, and the best ones have been moved into clinical trials. The pink one is one of the potential drugs that have been made, and these are the ones that are being moved into clinical trials in humans. So here's an example of a disease that might be treatable with a stack or a Sirtuin activator. This is a molecule called SRT-2104. The name doesn't so much matter, but this is a molecule that was given to 40 patients orally, so a little pill. The disease, many of you might recognize it, it's psoriasis. It's a disease of skin inflammation, and there's very little you can do. There's injections you can have with antibodies, but it's a horrible disease. And after 84 days of treatment, you can see that in this example of a patient, the disease was greatly reduced. And that's you might be saying, well, David, you told me it treats diabetes. You told me it slows down aging. Well, another hallmark of aging is that our bodies become inflamed. And we think that these Sirtuin genes, one of the main things they do is suppress inflammation. So there's a fair amount of excitement trying to make these drugs useful. And one of the ways that we might see these get on the market is to treat a disease of inflammation. And maybe one day, if it's safe enough, we could try it in other diseases and perhaps use it as a preventative for other major killers. All right, how is this meaningful to me? If you don't have a drug yet on the market, what can I do about it? Well, it turns out that just a very recent study showed that depending on the type of Sirtuin gene you have in your body, it may actually dictate how healthy you are and how long you live. And this is an example from the paper that I've just redrawn here. And so if you have a variant with a TT, so that's one of these bases of DNA, if it says TT on your 2 chromosomes, that's how long you're expected to live. This was a broad population from 18 to 65, so you're really looking at across the board, general sample of the population and how quickly they died after the initial study was started. So I've got this TT variant. I'm average. I would say most of you have this TT variant. But there are some lucky people who have either CC or TC, and they seem to be protected from diseases. These individuals have better blood glucose levels, which means they're protected from diabetes. And there are other studies, not this one, that show that these variants protect from diseases such as a heart attack. What would be interesting to do would be, and we'll hear later, that it's possible to edit the genome. And can you imagine that if we had the technology, and it's coming soon, to be able to convert all of us into this CC or TC variant and protect our organs from aging? What we think actually happens is that this CC or TC variant turns on the gene and makes more of this enzyme that protects the body against diseases. Now here's my son. He's done genetic testing too. We know also that he sadly has the TT variant. But we also learned that my family carries a mutation in the gene for cystic fibrosis. And many people do. And I'm lucky cystic fibrosis is not going to be apparent in my son because you need 2 of the mutations in one in each chromosome to get the disease. So he's going to be fine. So what I'm going to tell you tonight, just in the last couple of slides, is that I think we can do something about this. And there's new technology that's just coming online that's going to allow us to have a big impact on genetic diseases. And so here I'm going to preface some more talks that are coming later, that there's now really great technology that's going to allow us to edit our genomes. And many of you may not have heard of it yet. This is an example of a protein called Cas9 that can go in to cells and alter just one base in your chromosome. And what we want to do is to go into cells and correct that. But we want to take this a step further, that we think that we can edit and fix the genome of our descendants. So if you have no option but to pass on Huntington's disease to your children, we think we can help you. And we can get rid of that mutation from your germline, as it's called. And so we have technology now. We grow in the lab cells that give rise to eggs. We're going to grow cells that give rise to sperm. And we can edit the genomes of these cells from women and fix those diseases before we put them back and that they have children. And we think that we can, for the first time, safely and reliably do that. And I think that that will be a great thing for the world. And lastly, I just put up my family to remind me to tell you that what we're going to have is a world where I believe that we will not have to worry about caring for our parents in a demented state, which is just a huge burden. We will have a world where our children can learn from their great-grandparents, and their great-grandparents can play tennis with their great-grandkids and see them graduate from college. That's the world we're heading towards, and we're going to look back when we get there at our time and think those poor people, like we do the time before antibiotics. And I want to leave it there, and I thank you for coming tonight.
All of the tremendous things that you've showed us, which one are you most excited about, and what do you think is the timeline for delivering that to us?
Okay. Very good question. So the first one is, what's the most exciting technology? Well, I wanted to tell you that there's a big buzz in the field about reversal of aging. And that doesn't mean that we're going to cure your baldness, if you have baldness or gray hair. What that means is that we're learning that some aspects of aging, such as type 2 diabetes and metabolic defects, and even changes in cancer cells, are highly reversible. For example, in my lab, if we give one particular molecule that turns on these genes, within a few days we can reverse all of the aspects of aging in the muscle when we look at metabolism, inflammation, and other things. So reversibility is the next wave that's coming. And how long is it going to be? Well, you've seen that there are clinical trials. I think if they go well, it's going to be 5 to 10 years before we're able to do something meaningful. And I hope that we're all around to see that.